As code pipeline, CI/CD, what do these things mean? What are these things? Before I get started on the inner features of AWS CodePipeline, I just think it's important to give an overview of what these individual terms mean. I admit that when I picked CodePipeline as a topic for my professional development presentation, that I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting, but I really had little to no knowledge of what any of these things were, so I had to educate myself a little on what these technologies are known for. Amazon Web Services, AWS. I mean, by now we're familiar with AWS. In an enterprise Java class, we've configured an Elastic Beanstalk environment as well as utilized Cognito within AWS for sign-in and authentication functionality for an application. If you're like me, you're also taking or have taken the Cloud for Developers course this semester, in which we've utilized additional AWS services like EC2 and S3 and IAM, DynamoDB, Lambda, so on and so forth. Those services are important to the AWS environment, but they are only a few of many, many services that Amazon Web Services actually offers. Amazon currently offers over 200 online services through AWS, and AWS is the most popular cloud platform in the world, owning almost 40% of the world's market share. I think Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure are the next most popular cloud platforms, but really trail in usage considerably to Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services comprises over a fifth of Amazon's total sales, at least in the second part of this year it did. And Amazon Web Services offers a pay-as-you-go model, which is, I think, really just another way of basically saying pay by how much you consume model. But there are no initial fees or setup fees or contracts involved in the pay process. Okay, so code pipeline. A code pipeline is a workflow construct that describes how software changes go through a release process. Each pipeline is made up of a series of stages, like a build stage, a deploy stage, a source code stage, a test stage, which act as logical divisions in your workflow. And within the AWS CodePipeline framework, there are services like AWS CodeBuild or AWS CodeDeploy that help with establishing build and deploy configurations for your pipeline. CodePipeline is very inclusive, actually. There are several services, including services outside of the AWS ecosystem that can be used in conjunction with AWS services and other third-party services in the various stages of pipeline development. I think the graphical user interfaces within the AWS CodePipeline console, if you were, actually make it pretty easy to include or connect to these outside third-party services. Okay, CI/CD, or continuous integration and continuous development. These are a couple of terms that I have seen a lot or come across during my time as an IT student, but have never really followed up on or knew much about. They're mostly closely associated with DevOps, which is a combination of it's a model that combines software development and IT operations, essentially, and is utilized to facilitate software delivery with software quality in mind. There is a difference between CI and CD. CI, or continuous integration, is more concerned with the quality aspect of software development. Software developers use a shared repository to integrate their source code and test for defects before there's any notion of putting their application out to production. And CD, or continuous delivery, is code that is already production ready. It is a continuation of continuous integration, essentially. The code is changed, it's pushed out to a version control repository by the developer, but then sent through a pipeline, sent to production and out to the internet to be consumed. And we'll see a diagram of this process in a minute or so. AWS CodePipeline itself is an example of a continuous delivery process. Okay, so when we sort of put it all together, we get AWS CodePipeline. And as I've already addressed, CodePipeline can be integrated with other AWS services and third-party services to send your application from version control to live on the web. Each time there's a change in code, CodePipeline is triggered, and the application is sent through the pipeline to deployment. AWS provides a selection of tools to use, such as GUIs within AWS console, which I mentioned in the last slide, or the command line interface that can configure and work with the AWS CodePipeline process. So this is kind of a example of how it works. This is an example of how CodePipeline could run. A pipeline can be as simple or as complex as your release process requires. With some web application environments, all you really need is a source code source and a deployment instance like Beanstalk. But with Java, you probably wouldn't want to, or you couldn't really be that simple in your pipeline process, because you would need at least a build process involved to build your code. But you can also include other services within your pipeline process, like logging service, like AWS CloudWatch, for instance. So in this particular diagram, though, when developers commit changes to a source code repository, CodePipeline automatically detects the changes, and the AWS CodePipeline can be configured to notice the changes in code, or the developer's version control can send out what they call a webhook to tell CodePipeline that a change to code has been made, and those changes are then built. And if any changes, or if any tests are configured, those tests are run. After the tests are complete, the built code is deployed to a staging service for testing. And then from the staging servers, CodePipeline runs more tests, perhaps, such as integration or load tests. Upon the successful completion of those tests, and after a manual or human, if you will, approval action that was added to the code, or the pipeline is approved, CodePipeline deploys the tested and approved code to production instances like Elastic Beanstalk or AWS OpsWorks stacks or Amazon ECS or something like that. If there are any suggestions, requests, or bugs caught by users, hopefully they're relayed back to the development team, and the development team remedies those issues. And then the whole pipeline process just starts all over again after changes are made to the code. So this is another example of a CodePipeline process. As GitHub and Elastic Beanstalk users, like we are in our Enterprise Java class, this diagram may provide a more familiar approach to creating our own AWS CodePipeline environment. You can see in this diagram how individual services are applied to and how stages are implied to the pipeline. Pushing code to GitHub may imply a change in code, which then triggers the AWS CodePipeline process. Everything that's happening in the code pipeline in this particular diagram is happening in the pinkish salmon colored area. Everything that's happening in the AWS ecosphere is basically happening in the light brown or tannish colored areas of the image. And everything that is encircled in AWS must be really manually configured. Everything that's specific to the code pipeline will be manually configured when the pipeline is created. The source code represented as a source stage is sent to AWS, where it is built by CodeBuild. into a war artifact and stored in an S3 bucket along with the original source code. There is a configuration file that's associated with CodeBuild called buildspec.yaml that is a collection of build commands and related to settings written in YAML format. And this file goes at the top of the project directory of the application. And this part of the pipeline really can be referred to as the build stage. The deploy stage is represented by CodeDeploy, which outputs the war artifact to Beanstalk, where the application can be seen on the web then. Hey, costs. True to Amazon Web Services pay-as-you-go model, you will pay depending on the tools and the frequency of those tools you're using within the CodePipeline environment. AWS does provide a cost calculator, which I've included a link to or a URL to at the bottom of the slide that can really help determine your overall costs. According to Amazon Web Services, everyone is entitled to one CodePipeline at no charge for the first 30 days after creation. And after that, it's at least $1 for the pipeline as long as the pipeline is active, which means that the pipeline has existed for more than 30 days and has at least one code change that runs through it during the month. Additional charges may accrue depending on storage and pipeline usage, as well as the addition of non-AWS tools that you might use in your pipeline configuration. If you're signed up under AWS free tier, AWS CodePipeline offers new and existing customers one free active pipeline each month, though free tier does have limitations in the services that are offered, so you may not be able to use all of the technologies that are typically available within the CodePipeline. So yeah, benefits of using the CodePipeline. From a personal standpoint, I think that using CodePipeline is actually a really useful tool to be using, as it can be a seamless workflow for pushing your application out from GitHub to your Beanstalk instance without having to manually do it by uploading your WAR file each time. Every time you make a change to your code and would like to move it out to AWS. The only drawback could be cost, and if you're signed up under a free tier account, you also may have a limitation in the number of services that you can use with CodePipeline. I'm guessing that costs are actually fairly minimal, maybe several dollars perhaps, if even that, if you were to set up CodePipeline and use it until the end of the semester for your project. I think it would be at your advantage actually to determine what the cost of the CodePipeline would be and any other services you would like to use in conjunction with CodePipeline. And you could use the AWS or the Amazon Web Services cost calculator webpage to do that. So using CodePipeline, one of the benefits is removing some of the complexity and overhead to making applications, the building and the testing and the deploying. You know the deployment process that your application is going through with CodePipeline. AWS provides many tools that you can use to interact and configure with your CodePipeline. As part of the Amazon Web Services ecosystem, and an application using Amazon Web Services CodePipeline can integrate with all of the other, or with many other Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services provides its own version control called CodeCommit. Your pipeline could use its own build tool like CodeBuild to compile and test your application. It could use CodeDeploy for deploying to Beanstalk or an EC2 instance. There are all kinds of possibilities with the Amazon Web Services CodePipeline framework. If you'd like to follow up more with more information about the AWS CodePipeline, there are, of course, a lot of resources on the web to refer to. Perhaps you're interested in implementing it for your individual project. The most obvious place to start is Amazon Web Services website for CodePipeline. which I have included in this slide. That particular page, web, or part of the Amazon Web Services website includes tutorials on a variety of Amazon Web Service code pipeline configurations. There are also many video tutorials on YouTube that take you step by step through setting up a AWS CodePipeline environment. The videos I've included in this particular slide use GitHub and Beanstalk and really help me get a better understanding of how CodePipeline works and how it can be configured using the GUIs provided by Amazon Web Services. Okay, well, that comes to the end of the presentation. Thank you for watching. I hope it was informative and piqued your interest in the technologies presented. I'm seriously considered using AWS CodePipeline for my own individual projects. So if I can figure out how to properly configure an AWS CodePipeline environment that is conducive to the kind of environment that we are using in our enterprise Java class, and that doesn't cost too much money, I might follow up with a video demonstration that I will post to Slack. So something to consider, but thank you for watching.